And what we're going to be doing is a 25% tariff on all cars that are not made in the United States.
This decision has led Trump to face global reactions, with the EU and Germany launching an all-out attack on the US. The decision to impose a 25% tariff on cars imported from Germany could increase the price of these vehicles by $5,000 to $7,000 each, a significant amount for US consumers. By 2024, the US imports nearly 3 million cars from Germany annually, with a total export value of $35 billion in cars from Germany to the US. German car brands such as BMW, Audi, and Mercedes-Benz will face the biggest direct impact from this tariff policy, forcing them to reconsider their pricing strategies and production in the US market. German automakers will face a major challenge in maintaining their market share in the US, as consumers may look for alternative options from other brands. Furthermore, the price increase on cars could lead U.S. consumers to pay higher prices for these vehicles, reducing their purchasing power. Immediately after the announcement of this tariff decision, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz strongly criticized President Trump's move.
Die weltwirtschaftliche Entwicklung beeinträchtigt und vielleicht für viele Jahre zu einer wirtschaftlichen Depression führt, weltweit, in den USA, aber auch in vielen anderen Ländern.
This warning not only reflects Germany's strong opposition, but also signals that this trade war could have far-reaching effects on industries worldwide. Germany views this tariff as not just an economic confrontation, but also an assault on the long-standing trade values between nations. German car brands such as BMW, Audi, and Mercedes-Benz are key players in the U.S. economy, and the imposition of this tariff could drive both economies into a crisis.
But if it is necessary, we have a strong plan to retaliate, and we will use it.
Tariffs could be imposed on key U.S. products such as agriculture technology and digital services. The EU is considering tariffs of up to 30% on U.S. agricultural products like soybeans, beef, and corn, with a total export value of around $12 billion each year. Not stopping there, U.S. tech giants like Amazon, Apple, and Google may face tariffs of up to 20%. This shows that the EU is not just reacting to the car tariff policy, but is preparing for a comprehensive trade war, and it will not be easy for the U.S. to avoid the impact of these measures. Trump's decision to impose this tariff not only has a severe impact on trade relations between the U.S. and Germany, but it also provoked strong reactions from other countries like Canada, Japan, and South Korea. Canada, a close ally of the U.S., has voiced its criticism of this decision and declared it will implement retaliatory measures against U.S. goods worth about $7 billion. Additionally, countries like Japan and South Korea are concerned that this tariff policy will affect their automotive and technology industries, as Japanese and South Korean companies also export cars to the U.S. This tariff could trigger a global backlash, forcing the U.S. to face consequences from all its partner nations. Not only that, these countries may begin seeking alternative trade partners to reduce their dependence on the U.S. This could lead Trump into a situation of gradual isolation, not only in trade relations but also on the international political stage. While Trump may feel proud of his tariff policies, they are causing cracks within the U.S. Voters in key states like Florida and Wisconsin are beginning to doubt the effectiveness of Trump's decisions, creating a backlash within the Republican Party. Florida and Wisconsin, once considered Trump's and the Republican Party's home turf, are now seeing Democratic candidates making significant gains, forcing Trump into a political panic. Can he maintain support in his home turf, or will he face a shift in strategy to win over voters, especially as support from traditional voters continues to fade?
Yesterday, President Trump addressed last week's stock market turmoil caused by confusion around his tariff agenda.
Japan's shocking move, economic retaliation, that worries the U.S., financial markets in turmoil. Japan has just taken a step that could shake the U.S. economy. They are quietly selling off large amounts of U.S. Treasury bonds, an unprecedented move. What does this mean? Is Japan trying to put pressure on the U.S.? And how big will the impact be? Japan cuts U.S. bonds. A warning for Washington? For decades, Japan has been one of the largest creditors of the U.S., holding hundreds of billions of dollars in Treasury bonds. This has helped finance U.S. debt and stabilize the dollar. But recently, Tokyo has significantly reduced its holdings of U.S. bonds. According to the latest financial reports, Japan has sold tens of billions of dollars in U.S. Treasuries over the past few months. This is a concerning move. Why is Japan doing this? The answer may lie in the growing trade tensions between the two countries, particularly over U.S. tariffs on Japanese electric vehicles. The U.S. government has imposed high tariffs on imported EVs, including those from major Japanese automakers like Toyota, Honda, and Nissan. Tokyo is not happy, and now Japan seems to be using its financial weapon to retaliate against the U.S. But the bigger question is, if Japan continues to sell off U.S. bonds, what will happen to the dollar and the global economy? The U.S. protects its EV industry. Japan strikes back. To understand this, we need to look at the U.S. strategy. The U.S. is pushing to develop its domestic EV industry, aiming to compete with China and Europe. American automakers like Tesla, General Motors, and Ford are receiving massive government support, while imported EVs are hit with high tariffs. But why is Japan affected so much? Because Japanese automakers lead the world in hybrid and EV technology. For example, Toyota pioneered hybrid cars with the Prius. Nissan was one of the first to mass-produce EVs with the Nissan Leaf. Honda is rapidly expanding its EV lineup. Japan believes it has superior technology, yet the U.S. is blocking its products with tariffs. And that's why Tokyo is retaliating financially. Cutting U.S. Treasury bond holdings sends a clear message. If the U.S. continues protectionism, Japan will stop supporting the U.S. economy by buying its debt. The key question now: how long can Washington endure this pressure? Is Japan trying to reduce its dependence on the dollar? Another major reason for Japan's bond sell-off is its desire to reduce dependence on the U.S. dollar. The global financial system is shifting. China is reducing its dollar reserves and promoting the yuan. Russia has cut U.S. bond holdings following economic sanctions. Other Asian nations, like South Korea and India, are diversifying their foreign assets. Now, Japan may be following this trend. Tokyo could redirect its capital into Asian markets, strengthening cooperation with China, South Korea, and ASEAN to build a more independent regional financial system. This could accelerate the decline of U.S. dollar dominance. So the big question is, could Japan's move be the first step in a major shift in the global economy? If Japan continues selling bonds, how will the U.S. respond? Can the U.S. ignore Japan's warning? If Japan continues to sell U.S. bonds, the dollar could be seriously impacted. A worst-case scenario could unfold. Dollar value declines, increasing import costs and causing inflation in the U.S. Higher U.S. bond interest rates, raising borrowing costs for the U.S. government. Global financial market instability, creating a domino effect on the world economy. The U.S. has two choices: compromise with Japan, reducing EV tariffs to maintain financial stability, continue the confrontation, accepting financial and trade risks. Both options carry major risks. The biggest question now: what will the U.S. do next? We are at a critical moment in economic history, and this may be just the beginning. Stay tuned for the next developments. What if you spent $8 billion on a weapon, but couldn't fully control it? And what if the country that sold it to you could shut it down remotely? The German government is now considering canceling its $8.4 billion deal to purchase 35 F-35 fighter jets from Washington, a move that has stunned global defense observers. But the concern isn't about combat performance. It's about the kill switch, a built-in feature that gives the U.S. the ability to remotely disable the aircraft if needed. As geopolitical tensions rise between Washington and Europe, Berlin is starting to ask, if the alliance fractures, would the U.S. use that control? Germany's decision doesn't come in a vacuum. It follows a wave of NATO allies pulling back, raising a larger question. Is the F-35 losing its grip as the NATO standard? Canada and Portugal are also backing away. Just last week, Portugal announced a freeze on its F-35 procurement plans. Canada, which signed a $19 billion agreement, is now openly reconsidering the entire deal, and the reason is the same across the board: concerns over technological dependence and political risk from the United States. Three of America's major allies raising doubts about the F-35 at the same time is no longer an isolated incident. It's becoming a quiet wave of withdrawal, one that threatens to shake the foundation of U.S. weapons exports. If Germany, Canada, and Portugal all walk away from the F-35, this won't just be a trade setback. It could mark a strategic turning point for NATO itself. Europe begins building its own weapons. Instead of relying on the US, European nations are now developing their own sixth-generation fighter jet programs. Germany, France, and Spain are collaborating on the Future Combat Air System, FCAS, expected to be operational by 2040. At the same time, the UK and Italy, together with Japan, are advancing the Global Combat Air Program, GCAP. If successful, Europe could gain full air power independence, putting an end to decades of reliance on American hardware. But more than just a technological shift, this is a strategic declaration. EU nations are sending a clear message. We want to defend ourselves with our own technology. Europe's transformation isn't just about defense policy. Germany is changing industrially as well. Volkswagen, Europe's largest carmaker, has announced it is exploring entry into military production. Why? Falling demand for civilian vehicles, combined with the EU's massive Rearm Europe rearmament fund. Analysts believe if this trend spreads, we could witness a fundamental restructuring of Europe's economy as civilian giants gradually enter the defense sector. And the big question is, will this be enough for Europe to stand fully independent on security without the United States? The big question, how much longer can America hold its ground? The F-35 was once considered the backbone of NATO's defense system, but now it's the core member states who are quietly stepping away. The question is no longer, will one nation pull out of the F-35 program? It's become, can the United States still hold its central role in global defense strategy as its allies begin to walk away? When technology is no longer exclusive, when politics no longer guarantee trust, a new era is taking shape. And the old order may be crumbling, piece by piece. If a pillar like Germany steps back, can smaller nations still justify staying in the F-35 program? A growing imbalance of trust is spreading. Not just in terms of technology, but across the strategic foundations of the alliance. Because when trust falters, even the most advanced weapons can't bridge the divide. And for the first time in decades, Europe is asking a hard question. Do we still need America the way we once did? Don't look away. There's much more waiting just ahead.
Is the world leaving America? Germany, Canada, Mexico strike back in trade war. In March 2025, the U.S. slapped tariffs on a series of strategic partners. Germany got furious. Canada called it a direct attack. And the rest of the world started looking for a way out from Washington's shadow. U.S. strikes first, protection or provocation. On March 4, 2025, the Trump administration suddenly imposed a 25% tariff on imported vehicles and auto parts, citing the need to protect domestic manufacturing. It sounded patriotic, but the Wall Street Journal estimated car prices in the U.S. could rise by 10 to 15%. There was no long-term plan, no phased rollout, just a sudden decision, and the market reacted immediately. While American consumers were still trying to understand what had just happened, Germany and Canada responded as if they'd been kicked off the dinner table. Germany's outrage. Trump is creating losers. Right after the tariff announcement, Chancellor Olaf Scholz spoke out. This policy is wrong and will create nothing but losers. With 30% of its exported vehicles going to the U.S., German automakers like Volkswagen, BMW, and Mercedes weren't worried about America growing stronger. They were worried the global supply chain might break, with just one signature. Germany's Industrial Association, VDA, warned that thousands of jobs could vanish if the conflict dragged on. And then Germany delivered a clear message. Nobody wins in a trade war. Canada, from partner to target for annexation. In February 2025, the U.S. increased tariffs by 25% on all Canadian goods, except oil and gas. But what shocked the world was Trump's suggestion that Canada could avoid the tariffs.
I think they have to become the 51st state. I think we're going to have to keep it for the 51st state. I call him Governor Trudeau. I think it's actually cost him his election. I think Canada.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau reacted harshly, accusing the U.S. of trying to interfere with Canada's sovereignty and natural resources. New PM Mark Carney called it
a direct attack.
From then on, Canada stopped responding with words. They acted, boycotting American goods, pushing cultural independence, and riding a wave of modern nationalism not seen in decades. EU and Germany, blocking the US, embracing Canada. The EU didn't just speak up, it acted. Olaf Scholz firmly declared,
Wir stehen an der Seite Kanadas. Es ist ein unabhängiges, souveränes Land. Und wir alle gemeinsam setzen uns dafür ein, dass der Irrweg des Protektionismus nicht die Wachstumschancen der ganzen Welt zerstört.
Canada was named the official partner of Hanover Industrial Fair 2025, the largest trade event in Europe. At the same time, the CETA agreement between the EU and Canada was revived, paving the way for a trade alliance without the US. Mexico, quiet, but sharp. Unlike Canada, Mexico stayed silent. They waited. After the U.S. slapped a 25% tariff in March 2025, President Claudia Steinbaum issued a carefully worded response. We will respond selectively at the right time. She called America's justification defamatory, baseless. With a trade volume of $800 billion per year, Mexico didn't want to pour gasoline on the fire. But make no mistake, when needed, they hit back. If you keep shouting America is number one while the world quietly walks away. The real question isn't, who's standing with you? It's, is anyone still listening at all?
The U.S. economy is facing a massive tariff storm worth $60 billion from major countries. Canada and the EU have retaliated, increasing the pressure on the U.S. economy. Since Trump decided to impose a 25% tariff on aluminum and steel, both Canada and the EU have not hesitated to implement retaliatory measures. Canada, a country with deep trade ties to the U.S., has imposed retaliatory tariffs on goods worth up to $16.6 billion, including products from steel, aluminum, and various consumer goods. Particularly, the tariffs on imported aluminum and steel from the U.S. will have a significant impact on key U.S. industries such as automotive and construction. Recent data from the World Trade Organization, WTO, shows that Trump's tariff policies have started to visibly harm U.S. industries. For instance, just 1 month after the tariffs were imposed, U.S. exports to major partners like the EU and Canada dropped significantly. Steel production in the U.S. also recorded an 8% decrease in the first quarter of 2025, one of the sharpest declines in the past 5 years. U.S. businesses, particularly those in steel and aluminum manufacturing, are facing skyrocketing material costs and fierce competition from other countries. The European Union is also taking action. The EU has imposed retaliatory tariffs worth $28 billion on U.S. products, including items like cars, wine, and agricultural products. What's noteworthy is that in addition to tariffs, the EU has implemented a long-term strategy to protect its own industries and reduce dependence on the U.S. market. This action from the EU signals that they are seeking a more independent path, which could have far-reaching effects on future trade relations between the U.S. and European countries. These moves by Canada and the EU are not only disrupting U.S. industries, but are also causing a loss of confidence among investors in the U.S. government's economic policies. According to reports from J.P. Morgan and Goldman Sachs, the U.S. stock market has seen its largest drop in 6 months since the 2008 financial crisis. The S&P 500 index has decreased by 12%, while the Dow Jones has fallen by 10%, reflecting instability in the U.S. economy. The effects are not limited to large corporations, but have spread to U.S. consumers as well. Prices for consumer products, from cars to electronics, have increased by 5% to 15% due to these tariffs. This adds more pressure on consumers, especially middle-income family. Economists predict that if this situation continues, the U.S. economy may fall into a recession in the last quarter of 2025. Furthermore, the rising cost of living could reduce purchasing power, leading to a drop in consumer demand and impacting economic recovery. Without timely intervention, this situation could push many individuals into financial hardship. Since the trade war began, there has been division not only among international partners but also within the U.S. itself. Experts argue that without a change in policy, the U.S. could continue facing a loss of confidence from its allies and a major risk of a global economic recession. IMF forecasts indicate that if the trade war persists, global economic growth will slow, and the U.S. economy could shrink by up to 2% in 2026. This will affect key industries and directly impact people's lives, with higher prices and fewer job opportunities. If the U.S. does not find a solution, this instability could continue to spread worldwide. While there are many pessimistic forecasts, there is still a possibility that the U.S. will find a way to resolve the situation. Negotiations between the U.S. and its international partners will continue, and in a volatile world, reaching fairer trade agreements could help stabilize the economy and restore international relations. However, this requires a major adjustment in policies and a long-term strategy, rather than short-term decisions. Can the U.S. overcome this tariff storm? Will Trump's trade decisions help the U.S. economy recover, or will they lead the country into a prolonged recession?